Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between myself and Michael K Vaughan, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we have wasted our youths, or our adulthoods, in this case, as the comic in question is this run on Captain America called New Deal. This was written by John Ray Reber and drawn by John Cassaday, who's going to be familiar to a lot of you probably from the X-Men. He was the artist on the Astonishing X-Men and did that really put him on the map, that run in the X-Men. And here he takes on Captain America, and he does a great job. He's a fantastic comic book artist. There's great artwork here and whatnot. And Reber is a good writer, but this is a complex, complicated run on Captain America. For a number of reasons. Captain America was born in the fervor of patriotism at the start of World War II, right? And he was one of many characters that wore the American flag. He's just the one that took off. He's the one that became super popular. There were lots of others. And from the comic book company that became Marvel Comics alone, there were half a dozen at least. And that is a troublesome birth, because it wouldn't have been troublesome if Captain America had died at the end of World War II and that had been the end of it. And maybe if all of this were being done with forward planning and dispassion, that would have happened. But instead, the character continued, and Stan Lee brought him back very much into the present day. Had him in suspended animation and then thawed out and woken up in the present day. And that opens a whole can of worms. That when Stan Lee did it, in all fairness to him, he couldn't have seen coming. Because Captain America inevitably becomes... It's harder to have a character that is meant to be sort of an avatar of the virtues of your country when your country is not in World War II. If your country's in World War II, then it's fairly easy, comparatively easy. You are up against one of the worst evils of the 20th century. Granted, that position of being opposed to Nazism is muddied a little by the fact that one of your allies is an even greater monster. But no one was thinking about that at the time. Instead, it was very much billed as the forces of good versus the forces of evil. And the discovery and the liberation, so-called liberation of the concentration camps at the end of the war, cemented that. Absolutely cemented it. That's easy. When you have a character draped in the American flag, it's easy to write and have that character in an environment like that. It's much harder to have that character when that environment changes. And it did. It did change. Because after Stan Lee revived this character, this is going to be a little bit trickier than my usual Epic Comic Book Wednesday rants about poor continuity, because here we can't help but wade into politics. And what on earth do you do if you are a writer at Marvel Comics and you have a character named Captain America during the Vietnam War? What on earth do you do? Writers had to come up with what to do. They had to come up. Fortunately, they were largely spared what to do with the Korean War, but they had to come up with things to do during the Vietnam War. And it gets worse from there. If you're writing Captain America, and I was reading it when this was happening, what do you do with Captain America during Watergate? So is he America's biggest booster, or is he something more? Is he, as Frank Miller has it in one of his stories, loyal only to the dream? He's loyal to the flag, not necessarily the country. At the time, during Watergate, when I was buying 5 newspapers a day and reading Captain America for the artwork, I always was thinking that is a facile dodge. And to their credit, Marvel's writers abandoned that dodge and had Captain America abandon his identity as Captain America out of disillusionment with what an American president had done wrong. An American president named Richard Nixon. You can Google him. He had done something wrong. It's going to seem peanuts to you compared to an American president inciting and organizing an armed insurrection to overthrow the government by force and execute his vice president. That makes what Richard Nixon did look like small peanuts, because it comparatively was small peanuts. No one, including Richard Nixon, ever imagined in their wildest dreams that a sitting president would carefully orchestrate from months ahead of time. Here's how we can seize machines. Here's how we can shut down voting. Here's how we can disqualify voting results. And also, here's how we can take the Capitol. No one in a million years imagined that that would happen. But, and of course, that presents problems of its own that Captain America's writers from 2015 on have dramatically failed. Unfortunately, the main writer on Captain America in the Trump era was the very last person you would ever want to write this character. The very last person. But we're not talking about that. Michael and I will get around to that, to the Ta-Nehisi Coates run on Captain America someday, I imagine. If we both hit the same bad bottle of tequila, we probably will. But there's another thing. And there's another incident, another era in America that if you're writing Captain America, if you have a character like Captain America, you're going to have to address. And you might think I'm going to say it's 9/11. Because this came out in 2002. This was part of the Marvel Knights series. That's what that MK stands for. Kind of more encapsulated, more real world, more adult content. This came out in the wake of 9/11. Which I don't know how to look at my metrics for BookTube, but I'm assuming that most of the people who are watching this video remember 9/11. When America was attacked, when there was a four-pronged attack on America, on American soil, and the day was horrifying, and it was not quick. It wasn't over in 2 seconds. It took a long time for things to happen and for reports to come in about what happened in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, about what happened at the Pentagon. And of course, everyone could watch what happened at the two towers. If you're writing Captain America when that happens, you're going to have to deal with it. If you're writing for Marvel, Marvel is all about the world outside your window. Marvel, as we've talked about endlessly on Epic Comic Book Wednesday, is all about verisimilitude. As much of it as your comics can bear. These comics should be taking place in your world. Now, Stan Lee invented that and imported it into comic books, but he was perfectly willing to waive it once in a while. I mean, the New York City Police Department in Lee and Kirby's heyday in Marvel have gigantically sophisticated ray gun weapons that, of course, don't exist even now. But there's going to come a moment in the Marvel spirit of things, and I'm not, in this particular instance, I'm not just locating this to Marvel because, of course, DC did a 2-volume response to 9/11. That was singularly unsatisfying. But Marvel had to take it square on. The most famous example being the issue of The Amazing SpiderMan that had a black cover. And that opens with Spider-Man looking down at the wreckage of Ground Zero and saying, no, 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 no. He's as shocked as the reader is. That was a direct response, but if you're writing Captain America, you're going to have to do that too. And this comic does. This has a scene of not Captain America in costume, but Steve Rogers, his secret identity, helping to move rubble at Ground Zero, which a whole bunch of New Yorkers did at first until they were warned off by federal reclamation teams who've died like droves because of the things that they inhaled at Ground Zero. You're going to have to deal with that. That is sort of fan service. It's kind of a cheap and easy patriotism. You're going to have Steve Rogers down at Ground Zero moving rubble around. But this comic goes on from there and has the rise of Captain America here is, of course, going to face terrorism. And also, in a good bit by the author here, he's going to work against knee-jerk profiling, which there was a rash of that happened in the wake of 9/11, where Arab Americans or Arab immigrants were profiled out of anger, out of knee-jerk racism, that sort of thing. And here in these issues, unlike what would have happened in the 1940s, in these issues, Captain America is fighting against that. He is standing against that. And, if that was all you were going to do with the New Deal, then, okay, you could do that, and then you could have Captain America fight generic terrorists. And that would be a kind of authorial response because terrorists were on everybody's mind at the time. And this comic, these issues do have really big action sequences that are really well done. The problem isn't 9/11, in my opinion. the problem, the thing that makes the New Deal and response comics like this really tinny, really hard for me to read, is not 9/11. It's the wake of 9/11. By the time the author and the artist were working on these issues, yes, 9/11 had happened, but also the aftermath of 9/11 had happened. And one piece of that aftermath was the United States invading Afghanistan. And the horrifying pretext of that invasion. If I was watching the news almost nonstop. I was buying every newspaper that I could get my hands on at the time, because the dumb, reactionary, edibly conflicted, and religiously fundamentalist president of the United States was framing what he was doing in explicitly eschatological terms. He was phrasing it as a religious conflict. Even so far as paraphrasing the Bible, I was horrified when the President of the United States said, in public, in the well of the Senate, "You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. You're either with me or against me," paraphrasing his own Savior, in an act of war. I think I said out loud to I had a TV back then, I think I said out loud to the TV, "What about the people who don't want to be with you or against you? They don't get a say in the matter?" Not everything is known about this, but that's horrifying. Maybe I'm not conveying how horrifying that is for the world's gigantically predominant military superpower, for the leader of that power to say, "You're either with us or against us in this thing we've decided to do." That is horrifying. And that's not horrifying just to whoever you're going to pick as a bad guy. That should be every bit as horrifying to all the good guys in the world. The president said that. President Bush said that. And he also said, in response to who the enemy was, he didn't say the mullahs in Afghanistan who are hiding Osama bin Laden, refused to give Osama bin Laden up. He didn't say them. He said terror is the enemy. This is a war on terror. And again, I remember saying out loud to the TV or to a room full of beagles, you're going to propose and devote billions of dollars to a war on an ideology? On an idea? That literally is a limitless war. There will never be a world without terror. What are the actual goals here? And I didn't get an answer, and no one did, but it didn't stop the tanks from rolling. It didn't stop the aircraft carriers from positioning themselves. It didn't stop whole villages of Iraqis, of Afghanis from being bulldozed onto the earth. And it was only a prelude to an invasion of Iraq, a country that had nothing to do with 9/11. And again, the president of the most powerful country in the world was saying that our war is against the terrorists and all the nations who harbor them, all the nations who assist them. That got a rounding roar of applause. And it was a lie. And it was a lie from the beginning. The orchestrator of the United States war in Afghanistan and Iraq said, "We will go after the terrorists and anyone who aids them." What's the nationality of the men who actually drove the planes on 9/11? The guys who actually did the terrorist attacks on 9/11. What was their nationality? Did the United States invade Saudi Arabia? I must have missed it. What about the nationality of the people who knew where Osama bin Laden was hiding for years, supplied him with data, supplied him with supplies, moved him around from one posh house after another, with the full knowledge of large parts of the American intelligence industry, including the president in his daily briefings? Did the United States invade Pakistan? I must have missed it. It was, in other words, if you were paying attention, a bit of a pretext in the most horrible way possible, and open-ended so that you knew when it was happening. You knew when you were seeing the first film footage of tracer rockets over cities in Afghanistan that this could go on for decades. And it did, to the cost of lots and lots of American lives, but who knows how many innocent lives. Baked into these wars on the planning table, not an inadvertent consequence, on the planning table of these wars in complete peacetime in the Pentagon was an unmitigated war on the civilian population. A massive war crime. And even if you didn't know about those meetings before you started seeing the nightly news, you could tell right away on the nightly news that these massive amounts of attacks were not confined to military targets. Well, okay. If you're an American and you're buying 2 editions of the Boston Globe, 2 editions of the New York Times, all the editions of the Wall Street Journal, everything you can get from anything overseas, from Le Monde or whatever, And you're reading all about this stuff that's being done by your country totally against your will. 100% against your will. If I was iffy about invading Afghanistan to take out one mastermind, I was outright horrified by invading a country simply to change its leadership. A country that had nothing to do with 9/11. Where, nevertheless, thousands and thousands of the innocent people in that country are going to die, and who knows how many made into refugees. If you're an American in that situation, seeing that happen, and having either reservations about it, as a lot of people at the time I knew did, or being outright opposed to it, as I was, well, what are you going to do with Captain America? What are you going to do with Captain America? By the time these comics were hitting the stands, troops were already attacking civilians in Afghanistan. What do you do with Captain America then? I would argue that short of having Captain America once again hang up his secret identity, a Nomad Part 2, there's nothing you can do that won't be tinny, that won't ring wrong. And these issues, they are really well written. They are incredibly well drawn. But they ring wrong to me. They really, really do. There is no way. I mean, look at this cover. There's no way to be even ironically triumphalist in the wake of what the United States did when this comic was coming out, and would immediately go on to do when this comic was first gathered together in trade paperback. There's no way to be even ironically triumphant about that. It is just a stain. And it was. I reread this for today's Epic Comic Book Wednesday, and I simply could not get away from that. I simply could not. Now, it's a somber topic. This is a very well executed comic book, but I could not read it without that. But since it's a somber topic, I won't bang the drum quite so loud about my resistance to this kind of thing at all in comic books, especially since I really can't, because the yardstick I used to hold up was DC Comics in the Golden Age that did not reflect the real world at all. The writers and editors realized that if you were going to a superhero comic book, you were trying to get away from the real world. It was the last place that you wanted to read about the Korean War. They did occasionally mention it or notice it or that sort of thing, but it didn't drive the comics like it does with Marvel. But DC did that. They did respond to 9/11. So, I can't bang that drum at all. I would just say, this is a natural exponent of what you get if you write comics that way, as opposed to having Captain America fighting the Red Skull harmlessly. And I wish every once in a while when a writer decides to do that, it is really good. I wish that this were, but I don't know. Maybe the subject is just too raw to me, so that I couldn't like it. Maybe I couldn't recognize even if this were good. If you look at this comic as an attempt on the writer's part or the editorial team's part to answer, what do you do with a Captain America comic if your country is waging war on civilian populations in other countries? What do you do with the character of Captain America if that's true? If you're asking that question, I don't think this comic will answer it. And I don't see how you can read this comic without thinking about that question. So I'm afraid my Epic Comic Book Wednesday for this week is really interesting to reread. Really, really interesting to reread, but not entertaining, not enjoyable. I'd be really curious to know what those of you out there. I haven't watched Mike's video yet today. I'm assuming that he has some ambivalence about this as well. I'd be really curious to know what the rest of you think when you look back on these issues. Especially if you were paying really close attention. I was paying really close attention to everything that was going on. And I admit, I was thinking Nixonian thoughts. I was thinking, every once in a while, this country elects a Republican to the Oval Office, and they do absolutely horrible things. Absolutely horrible things. Of course, when I talk about absolutely horrible things for Richard Nixon, I'm not talking about Watergate. I'm talking about Laos and Cambodia. Epic, horrible things in which hundreds of thousands of innocent people die. Every once in a while, that will happen. And when these events were going on, I would go to the comic shop. I had a local comic shop at the time that I don't go to anymore. I don't think it exists anymore. But I would go in and I would see a red, white, and blue Captain America cover after having read the morning news, probably to an unhealthy extent. And I would think, oh no, I need adventures with Thor in Asgard. That's what I need right now. I do not need Captain America fighting terrorists. I do not need that. And if that reflex was bad here, well, there are some issues of a comic book called The Authority. Mike and I will get to The Authority in good time, and oh, that made it so much worse. Anyway, mixed reactions from me here. Mixed reactions when it comes to Epic Comic Book Wednesday this week. Always a pleasure to look at John Cassaday's artwork. He is really incredible. But I'm going to have to hope for better next week, that's for sure, because this just didn't do it. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. Sorry for the ambivalent video, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.